The CEO stood in line, his baseball cap pulled low and a worn-out jacket hiding his identity. He glanced around the fast food restaurant, the very chain he had built from the ground up. The smell of fries and burgers filled the air, and the sound of chatter and clattering trays surrounded him. He had done this before, visited his restaurants incognito, but this time felt different. Something in the air made him uneasy. As he reached the counter, a young cashier greeted him with a tired smile. Her name tag read manager in training, but the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. She looked exhausted, her hands trembling slightly as she tapped his order into the system. "How's your day going?" the CEO asked casually, trying to sound like any other customer. For a moment, the cashier hesitated. Then, as if a dam had broken, she leaned in and whispered, "Honestly? It's been awful. I've been working double shifts all week, and I still can't make ends meet. They cut our hours so they don't have to give us benefits, and if we complain, they threaten to replace us. I'm just so tired." The CEO froze. His heart pounded in his chest as her words sank in. This wasn't what he had envisioned when he started the company. He had always believed his employees were the backbone of his success, but now, standing there in disguise, he realized how far things had strayed from his original vision. Before he could respond, the cashier straightened up, forcing a smile. "Sorry, I shouldn't have said all that. Your total is $8.75. He handed her a $10 bill, his mind racing. As he walked away with his tray, he couldn't shake the image of her tired eyes or the weight of her words. He sat down at a corner table, his food untouched, and stared out the window. The CEO had come here to see how things were running, but he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected to hear the raw, unfiltered truth from someone who was supposed to be part of his team. As he sat there, a storm of emotions swirled inside him, guilt, anger, and a deep sense of responsibility. He knew he couldn't ignore what he'd just heard. Something had to change, and it had to start with him years ago, long before he became the CEO of a fast food empire. He was just a young man with a dream. Growing up in a small, working-class town, life hadn't been easy. His family struggled to make ends meet, and he often worked odd jobs after school to help out. He remembered the long hours at a local diner, washing dishes and mopping floors, just to earn a few dollars. It was hard work, but it taught him the value of perseverance and the importance of treating people with respect. Back then, he had a simple dream: to create a place where people could enjoy good food without breaking the bank, and where employees felt valued and supported. He wanted to build a business that wasn't just about profits, but about people. With a loan from a family friend and a lot of sleepless nights, he opened his first fast food restaurant. The early days were tough. He did everything himself: cooking, cleaning, serving customers, and balancing the books. But he loved it. He loved the hustle, the sense of community, and the smiles on his customers' faces. Slowly but surely, the business grew. One restaurant became 2, then 10, and eventually, hundreds. As the company expanded, he moved further away from the day-to-day operations. He hired executives, managers, and consultants to handle the growing empire. He trusted them to uphold the values he had built the company on, but over time, he became more focused on numbers and less on the people behind them. He spent most of his time in boardrooms, discussing profits, market shares, and expansion plans. The small-town boy who once washed dishes was now a powerful CEO, but somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with the very people who made his dream possible, the employees. Sitting in that restaurant, staring at his untouched meal, he realized how far he had strayed from his roots. The cashier's words echoed in his mind, a painful reminder of the disconnect between his vision and the reality of his company. He thought about his own struggles as a young worker, the exhaustion and frustration of feeling undervalued. He had promised himself he would never let his employees feel that way, yet here he was, hearing the same stories he thought he had left behind. The CEO leaned back in his chair, his food growing cold. He knew he couldn't turn back time, but he could make things right. He had built this company from nothing, and he still had the power to change it. But where would he even begin? The cashier's name was Lisa, though no one at work ever called her by her first name. To her coworkers and customers, she was just manager in training, a title that sounded important but came with little reward. At 28 years old, Lisa was a single mother to a 6-year-old boy named Jake. Her life revolved around two things: keeping a roof over their heads and making sure Jake had everything he needed. Lisa's days started early. She would wake up at 5 a.m., pack Jake's lunch, and drop him off at daycare before heading to her first shift at the fast food restaurant. Some days, she worked a double shift, leaving her exhausted but with just enough money to scrape by. The company had recently cut her hours to avoid giving her benefits, and the stress was starting to take its toll. She often wondered how she ended up here. She had dreams once, big dreams of going to college, starting a career, and giving Jake a better life. But life had other plans. When Jake's father walked out, Lisa was left to figure things out on her own. She took the job at the fast food chain because it was close to home and offered flexible hours, but the reality of the job was far from what she had hoped. The work was grueling. The restaurant was understaffed, and Lisa often found herself doing the jobs of 3 people. She took orders, cleaned tables, restocked supplies, and handled customer complaints, all while trying to keep a smile on her face. The pay was barely enough to cover rent and groceries, and the constant pressure to meet sales targets left her feeling like she was drowning. What hurt the most, though, was the way the company treated its employees. Managers were quick to criticize but slow to offer support. When Lisa asked for more hours or a raise, she was told to be grateful she even had a job. "There are plenty of people who would take your place," her manager had said during one particularly difficult conversation. Lisa had thought about quitting, but the thought of Jake kept her going. She couldn't afford to lose this job, no matter how hard it was. So she pushed through the exhaustion, the frustration, and the feeling of being invisible. That day, when the man in the baseball cap asked how her day was going, something inside her snapped. She didn't know why she opened up to him. Maybe it was the kindness in his voice or the way he looked at her like she was a person, not just an employee. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. After her shift, Lisa went home to find Jake waiting for her at the kitchen table, his homework spread out in front of him. He looked up at her with a big smile, and for a moment, all her worries melted away. "How was work, Mom?" he asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. Lisa forced a smile. "It was okay, buddy. Just another day." But as she tucked Jake into bed that night, her mind kept going back to the man at the counter. She wondered if he had heard her, really heard her, or if her words had just been another drop in the ocean of complaints that never seemed to go anywhere. Little did she know, her words had sparked something much bigger. The CEO couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his luxurious penthouse, staring at the ceiling, the cashier's words replaying in his mind like a broken record. "I've been working double shifts all week, and I still can't make ends meet. They cut our hours so they don't have to give us benefits." He tossed and turned, his guilt growing heavier with each passing hour. How had things gotten this bad? He had built his company on the promise of fairness and opportunity, but somewhere along the way, that promise had been broken. The next morning, he called his assistant and canceled all his meetings for the day. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to find them in a boardroom. Dressing in another casual outfit, jeans, a plain t-shirt, and the same baseball cap, he set out to visit more of his restaurants. His first stop was a location on the outskirts of the city. The restaurant was busy, with a long line of customers snaking out the door. He joined the queue, observing the employees as they worked. The staff moved like clockwork, but their faces told a different story. They looked tired, stressed, and disconnected. When it was his turn to order, he struck up a conversation with the cashier, a young man in his early 20s. "How's it going today?" the CEO asked, trying to sound casual. The cashier shrugged. "It's all right, I guess. Just another day in the grind." "Do you like working here?" The young man hesitated, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "Honestly? Not really. The pay is low, the hours are unpredictable, and the managers don't really care about us. But it's a job, you know? I need the money. The CEO nodded, his heart sinking. He thanked the cashier and took his food to a corner table, where he sat and watched the restaurant in action. The more he observed, the more he noticed the lack of communication between staff, the way managers barked orders instead of offering support, the overall sense of dissatisfaction among the employees. His next stop was a smaller location in a quieter neighborhood. Here, the atmosphere was different. The staff seemed happier, more relaxed. Curious, he approached the manager, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile. "This place seems different," he said. "What's your secret?" The manager chuckled. "No secret, really. I just treat my team like people, not machines. We work together, we support each other, and we make sure everyone feels valued. It's not always easy, but it's worth it." Her words struck a chord with the CEO. This was the kind of environment he had always wanted for his company, a place where employees felt respected and appreciated. But why was it the exception rather than the rule? By the end of the day, the CEO had visited 5 different locations. At each one, he heard similar stories: employees struggling to make ends meet, feeling undervalued and overworked. The contrast between the few well-run locations and the majority of struggling ones was stark. That evening, he sat in his office, staring at the framed photo on his desk, a picture of him standing in front of his first restaurant, beaming with pride. He had come so far, but at what cost? He thought about the cashier from the first restaurant, the young man from the second, and the manager from the third. They were the backbone of his company, the ones who kept the wheels turning. Yet, they were also the ones who were suffering the most. The CEO knew he had a decision to make. He could continue down the path he was on, prioritizing profits over people, or he could take a stand and make things right. But change wouldn't be easy. It would mean going against the advice of his executives, risking the company's bottom line, and facing resistance from those who were comfortable with the status quo. As he sat there, the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him, he realized something important: true success wasn't just about making money. It was about making a difference. Lisa had always been the kind of person who kept her head down and did her work. She didn't like to make waves or draw attention to herself. But after her conversation with the man in the baseball cap, something inside her shifted. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had been given a chance to speak up, and she couldn't let it go to waste. A few days later, during a rare break at work, Lisa gathered a few of her coworkers in the back room. They were all exhausted, their uniforms stained with grease and sweat, but they listened intently as she shared her idea. "I think we need to do something," Lisa said, her voice trembling but determined. "We can't keep going like this. We're working ourselves to the bone, and for what? We deserve better." Her coworkers nodded in agreement. One by one, they began to share their own stories, of missed family events, of bills they couldn't pay, of the constant stress of not knowing if their hours would be cut. The more they talked, the more they realized how much they had in common. "But what can we do?" one of them asked. "If we complain, they'll just fire us." Lisa took a deep breath. "We write a letter. All of us. We tell them what's going on and how it's affecting us. If we do it together, maybe they'll listen." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was a start. Over the next few days, Lisa and her coworkers worked on the letter during their breaks. They poured their hearts into it, detailing their struggles and suggesting ways the company could improve. They asked for better pay, more stable hours, and a workplace where they felt valued and respected. When the letter was finished, they all signed it and sent it to the company's headquarters. Lisa didn't know if it would make a difference, but she felt a sense of relief just knowing they had tried. Meanwhile, the CEO was still grappling with what he had learned during his visits to the restaurants. He had spent the past few days meeting with his executive team, trying to convince them that changes needed to be made. But not everyone was on board. "We can't afford to increase wages," one of the executives argued during a heated meeting. "Our profit margins are already thin. If we start giving out benefits, we'll be in the red." But what about our employees? The CEO countered. They're the ones keeping this company running. If we don't take care of them, we'll lose them, and then where will we be? The room fell silent. The CEO knew he was fighting an uphill battle, but he was determined to see it through. A few days later, the letter from Lisa and her coworkers arrived at the company's headquarters. It was passed around the office, sparking conversations and debates. Some dismissed it as the complaints of a few disgruntled employees, but others saw it as a wake-up call. When the CEO read the letter, he felt a mix of emotions, guilt, frustration, and a renewed sense of purpose. The words on the page were raw and honest, a stark reminder of the human cost of his company's policies. He called another meeting with his executive team, this time with the letter in hand. "This is what we're dealing with," he said, his voice firm. "These are the people who make our business possible. We can't ignore them anymore." The room was quiet as the executives read the letter. For the first time, some of them seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. "What do you propose we do?" one of them asked. The CEO took a deep breath. "We start by listening. We meet with employees, hear their concerns, and work together to find solutions. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but it's the right thing to do." The meeting ended with a plan to visit more restaurants and hold town hall-style meetings with employees. The CEO knew it was just the beginning, but it was a step in the right direction. As for Lisa, she had no idea that her letter had sparked such a big reaction. She went about her days as usual, working hard and doing her best to provide for Jake. But deep down, she held on to a glimmer of hope that things might change. Little did she know, her bold move was about to set off a chain of events that would transform the company, and her life, forever. The CEO sat alone in his office late one evening, the letter from Lisa and her coworkers spread out on his desk. The words stared back at him, each sentence a reminder of the struggles his employees faced. He had read it over and over, each time feeling a deeper sense of responsibility. The weight of his role as the leader of this company had never felt heavier. He knew he couldn't delay any longer. The time had come to make a decision, one that would define not only the future of his company, but also his legacy. He picked up the phone and called an emergency meeting with his executive team for the following morning. The next day, the boardroom was tense. The executives filed in, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. They had heard the rumors about the CEO's recent visits to the restaurants and the letter from the employees. No one knew what to expect. The CEO stood at the head of the table, his voice steady but firm. "I've spent the last few weeks visiting our restaurants and talking to our employees. What I've seen and heard has shaken me to my core. Our people are struggling, not just financially, but emotionally. They feel undervalued, overworked, and ignored. And frankly, I can't blame them." He paused, letting his words sink in. This company was built on the idea of fairness and opportunity. But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. We became so focused on profits and growth that we forgot about the people who make it all possible. That ends today. The room was silent as the CEO outlined his plan. He proposed a series of changes, including higher wages, guaranteed hours, and better benefits for all employees. He also suggested creating an employee feedback program, where workers could share their concerns directly with leadership. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a senior vice president, spoke up. "With all due respect, these changes will cost millions. Our shareholders won't be happy." The CEO nodded. "I understand the financial implications. But let me ask you this, what's the cost of losing our employees? What's the cost of losing the trust of the people who keep this company running? If we don't take care of our team, we won't have a business left to protect." Another executive chimed in. "What about the competition? If we raise wages, they'll undercut us." "Let them try," the CEO replied. "We're not just selling burgers and fries. We're selling an experience, one that starts with our employees. If we treat them well, they'll treat our customers well. And that's something our competitors can't replicate." The debate continued for hours, with arguments on both sides. Some executives supported the CEO's vision, while others worried about the risks. But in the end, the CEO's determination won out. The team agreed to move forward with the changes, starting with a pilot program at a few locations. As the meeting adjourned, the CEO felt a mix of relief and anxiety. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he also knew it was the right thing to do. Meanwhile, Lisa and her coworkers had no idea that their letter had sparked such a big reaction. They went about their days as usual, working hard and doing their best to make ends meet. But one afternoon, as Lisa was finishing her shift, her manager approached her with an unexpected announcement. "We're having a special meeting tomorrow," the manager said. "All employees are required to attend. It's important." Lisa's heart raced. She wondered if the meeting had something to do with the letter, but she didn't dare ask. She went home that night with a mix of hope and fear, unsure of what to expect. The next day, the restaurant was buzzing with speculation. Employees gathered in the dining area, whispering to each other as they waited for the meeting to begin. When the CEO walked in, the room fell silent. He stood at the front, his presence commanding attention. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "I know many of you have been struggling, and I want you to know that I hear you. Your voices matter, and your concerns have not gone unnoticed." He went on to announce the changes: higher wages, guaranteed hours, and a new program for employee feedback. The room erupted in applause, but Lisa stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. As the CEO continued speaking, his gaze landed on Lisa. He recognized her immediately, the cashier who had first opened his eyes to the truth. "And to the employee who wrote the letter," he said, his voice softening, "thank you. Your courage inspired these changes, and for that, I am deeply grateful." Lisa felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had never expected her words to make such an impact. For the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for herself, but for all of her coworkers. The meeting ended with a sense of excitement and optimism. Employees hugged each other, their spirits lifted by the promise of a better future. As the CEO left the restaurant, he felt a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. He knew there was still a long way to go, but he also knew he was on the right path. For Lisa, the journey was just beginning. The changes at the fast food chain didn't happen overnight, but they began to take root quickly. The CEO's announcement at Lisa's restaurant was just the start. Over the next few weeks, similar meetings were held at locations across the country. Employees who had once felt invisible now found themselves at the center of the company's new vision. At Lisa's restaurant, the atmosphere began to shift almost immediately. The first change was the introduction of guaranteed hours. Employees no longer had to worry about their shifts being cut at the last minute, and for many, this meant the difference between paying rent or falling behind. Next came the wage increases. Lisa couldn't believe it when she saw her first paycheck with the new rate. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. She wasn't just scraping by anymore, she was actually able to save a little each month. But the changes weren't just about money. The company also introduced a new employee feedback program, where workers could share their ideas and concerns directly with leadership. Lisa and her coworkers were encouraged to speak up, and for the first time, they felt like their voices mattered. One afternoon, Lisa's manager pulled her aside. "The CEO wants to meet with you," she said, her tone a mix of excitement and awe. Lisa's heart skipped a beat. "Me? Why?" "He didn't say, but I think it has something to do with the letter you wrote." A few days later, Lisa found herself sitting in the company's headquarters, waiting to meet the CEO. She had never been in a building like this before. It was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city that took her breath away. When the CEO walked into the room, Lisa stood up, her hands trembling. He smiled warmly and shook her hand. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I wanted to meet you in person and thank you for what you did. Your letter was the wake-up call I needed." Lisa didn't know what to say. She had never imagined that her words would reach the CEO, let alone lead to such big changes. I also wanted to ask for your help, the CEO continued. We're rolling out these changes across the company, and I'd like you to be part of the team that makes it happen. Your perspective is invaluable, and I think you could make a real difference. Lisa was stunned. Me? But I'm just a cashier. The CEO shook his head. You're more than that. You're someone who cares deeply about this company and the people who work here. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need right now. Lisa thought about Jake, about the life she wanted to give him, and about the opportunity to make a difference not just for herself but for others like her. She took a deep breath and nodded. I'll do it. Over the next few months, Lisa became an integral part of the company's transformation. She traveled to different locations, sharing her story and encouraging employees to embrace the changes. She also worked closely with the CEO and his team, offering insights and ideas that helped shape the company's new policies. But the transformation wasn't without its challenges. Some managers resisted the changes, worried about the impact on profits. Others struggled to adapt to the new way of doing things. There were moments of frustration and setbacks, but Lisa and the CEO remained committed to their vision. One of the biggest challenges came when the company announced plans to offer health benefits to all employees. The decision was met with pushback from shareholders, who worried about the cost. But the CEO stood firm. This isn't just about money, he said during a heated meeting. It's about doing what's right. If we take care of our employees, they'll take care of our customers, and that's how we'll succeed in the long run. His words resonated with many, and slowly but surely, the company began to change. Employees who had once felt undervalued now felt empowered. They worked harder, not out of fear, but out of pride. For Lisa, the transformation was life-changing. She was promoted to a managerial position, with a salary that allowed her to provide for Jake in ways she had never dreamed possible. She also found a sense of purpose she had never known before. But the journey was far from over. It had been 6 months since Lisa first met the CEO, and in that time, her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. She had gone from being a struggling single mother working double shifts to a key figure in the company's transformation. Her new role as a regional manager allowed her to travel to different locations, sharing her story and helping to implement the changes that were reshaping the company. One evening, as she was preparing for another trip, Lisa received a call from the CEO's office. He'd like to meet with you tomorrow, his assistant said. It's important. Lisa's heart raced. She wondered what the meeting could be about. Over the past few months, she had grown more comfortable in her new role, but she still felt a sense of awe whenever she interacted with the CEO. The next day, she arrived at the company's headquarters, dressed in a sharp blazer and heels, a far cry from the uniform she had worn just a few months ago. The CEO greeted her with a warm smile and led her to a small conference room. I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done, he said as they sat down. Your courage and dedication have been instrumental in driving these changes. I couldn't have done it without you. Lisa smiled, feeling a mix of pride and humility. Thank you. It's been an incredible journey. The CEO leaned forward, his expression serious. But there's something else I need to talk to you about. As you know, we've made a lot of progress, but there's still a long way to go. I'd like you to take on an even bigger role, one that will allow you to shape the future of this company. Lisa's eyes widened. What kind of role? I'd like you to join the executive team as the Director of Employee Experience. You'll be responsible for ensuring that our employees feel valued and supported at every level of the company. It's a big job, but I know you're the right person for it. Lisa was speechless. She had never imagined herself in such a position, but the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She had lived the struggles of the employees, and she understood their needs better than anyone. I'd be honored, she said finally. The CEO smiled. I knew you'd say yes. Welcome to the team. As Lisa left the meeting, she felt a sense of excitement and determination. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to face it. Over the next few weeks, Lisa threw herself into her new role. She worked closely with the CEO and the rest of the executive team, developing programs and initiatives to improve the employee experience. She also continued to visit restaurants, listening to employees and addressing their concerns. One of her first projects was the creation of an employee mentorship program, where experienced workers could guide and support new hires. She also introduced a series of workshops on financial literacy, helping employees manage their money and plan for the future. But the biggest change came when Lisa proposed the idea of profit sharing for employees. Under the new program, a portion of the company's profits would be distributed to all employees, giving them a direct stake in the company's success. The proposal was met with resistance from some members of the executive team, who worried about the financial impact. But the CEO supported Lisa's vision, and after a series of heated discussions, the plan was approved. When the profit-sharing program was announced, it was met with overwhelming enthusiasm from employees. For the first time, they felt like true partners in the company's success. As Lisa watched the positive impact of the changes, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had come a long way from the exhausted cashier who had once felt invisible, and she was proud of the difference she was making. But the journey wasn't just about her. It was about all the employees who had once felt undervalued and overlooked. It was about creating a company where everyone had the opportunity to succeed. And for Lisa, that was the greatest reward of all. 2 years had passed since the CEO first walked into one of his restaurants incognito, and the company had undergone a transformation that no one could have predicted. What started as a simple visit to check on operations had turned into a movement to put people first. The fast food chain was now a model for employee treatment in the industry. Wages were higher, benefits were better, and employees felt valued and respected. The profit-sharing program had been a game-changer, giving workers a direct stake in the company's success. And the employee feedback program had created a culture of openness and collaboration, where everyone's voice mattered. For Lisa, the journey had been nothing short of life-changing. As the director of employee experience, she had played a key role in shaping the company's new direction. She had traveled across the country, meeting with employees and hearing their stories. She had worked tirelessly to create programs and initiatives that made a real difference in people's lives. But the changes weren't just about policies and programs. They were about people. One afternoon, Lisa visited the restaurant where it had all begun. She walked in, her heart swelling with pride as she saw the familiar faces of her former coworkers. They greeted her with smiles and hugs, their gratitude evident in their eyes. "You did it," one of them said. "You changed everything." Lisa shook her head. "We did it. Together." As she walked through the restaurant, she noticed the little things, the way the employees interacted with each other, the smiles on their faces, the sense of pride in their work. It was a far cry from the stress and exhaustion she had once felt in this very place. Later that day, Lisa sat down with the CEO in the restaurant's dining area. They talked about the company's progress and the challenges that still lay ahead. "I never could have imagined this," the CEO said, looking around. "This is what I always wanted for this company, a place where people feel valued and supported." Lisa nodded. "It's amazing what can happen when you put people first." The CEO smiled. "And it all started with you. If you hadn't spoken up that day, none of this would have happened." Lisa felt a lump in her throat. She thought about how far she had come, from a struggling single mother to a leader in the company. She thought about Jake, who was now thriving in school, and about the life they had built together. "Thank you," she said softly. "For believing in me." The CEO shook his head. "Thank you for believing in this company. You reminded me of what really matters." As they sat there, surrounded by the hustle and bustle of the restaurant, Lisa felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had found not just a job, but a purpose. And she knew that her journey was far from over. The story of the fast food chain's transformation spread far and wide. It became a case study in business schools, a topic of discussion in boardrooms, and an inspiration for companies around the world. But for Lisa and the CEO, it was more than just a success story. It was a reminder of the power of one person's voice to create change. In the end, the lesson was simple but profound: a business is only as strong as the people who make it run. And when you take care of those people, anything is possible. The end.